Now, let's have a look at the takeoff for this evening. So again, purpose of goals is to generate that vertical velocity. We've got the horizontal velocity down the runway. Now we want to generate that vertical lift. Again, the key thing is conservation of posture. We want to make sure we maintain that posture. And if we kind of quickly think back to Daria Klashina, her posture was nice and upright. I think Samai, we'll see him jump shortly. His posture is almost leaning forward into the board, so his shoulders are in front of his hips. And that has a knock-on effect for what he does at takeoff in the air. But yeah, so we want to maintain that posture, and we want to maintain or not lose as much horizontal velocity as possible. Balance is really important. All of this is about coordination and making sure that when we finish that takeoff, it sets the athlete up for that mid-air action in whatever technique they do, whether it's the hitch kick, the hang, the sail, whatever. And again, an effective takeoff, there is a range, as we're looking at between 19 and 22. So we see the best athletes in the world operating within this area. So in terms of the takeoff, there's a number of mechanisms that are happening that we need to consider. And the reason we need to consider that is that has an implication on how we coach it, but also how we condition the athlete for the jump. So Lees and colleagues, and this is old research, and again, the biomechanics really haven't changed since then, but it stated that there was evidence for two mechanical, a muscular, and a biomechanical mechanism that acts through that takeoff phase. Now, the four mechanisms are described as the pivot. So if we look at that fixed position at takeoff coming through, in the same way as a wooden stick would pivot over, or similar to the pole vault, we've got that first part is the one mechanism. We've got the kind of swinging action of the free limbs, of the free leg and the arms. We've got the enhancement through that stretch shortening cycle. So we're loading up the quads, the Achilles, the calves to generate that stretch, and then we get the energy return from that using that stretch shortening cycle. And then at the end is that contraction, the concentric action as the muscle shorten through there. So we get that muscular element. So from a pivot point of view, we want to make sure that we don't get too much collapse in the knee and ankle and hip joints. So we need to be able to have an element of isometric strength conditioning within that to maintain that fixed position. Through the stretch shortening, there's going to be the lengthening of the muscles, and therefore we need to be able to condition the athletes eccentrically. So resist that load as the muscle extends, and that's what's happening through that stretch shortening cycle. And then, of course, concentric, as the muscle shortens, we need to do that. So activities, exercises that traditionally coach develop the muscle concentric action on that. So all those four mechanisms all contribute to the athlete generating vertical lift at takeoff. And we'll look at that just now. So some technical considerations for looking at, and we've got Miguel Echeverria here from his 883 jump that he jumped at. Now these images are really for illustrative, and there's a couple of things that I would like to suggest to him that might improve his takeoff if he needs it. However, preparation of takeoff flex. So we want to see that dorsiflexion of the ankle. And again, we talked about, as I just mentioned, that isometrically, we want to see the loading of the quads. And so the isometric action, it means that there is no flexion across the knee at that point. Okay, so we don't want to see the knee collapsing. And as we can see at maximum knee flexion on that second image in the top right, very little knee flexion from Miguel there at all. And low recovery of the takeoff step. And we can see that on there. But I would see on the first image, where his heel is really quite high up behind his buttocks, I would actually want to see that shin angle being more parallel, but that heel lower. That will allow the free knee and the foot to travel through properly at the other end. We'll talk about that in a sec. Contact patterns, again, are active and flat, and we're going to see that roll in action. So you got heel flat and then there's a roll off. Again, similar to the penultimate, foot contact is slightly in front of the center of mass, although Echeverria has a huge pronounced extended takeoff. normally. And again, we see the pivot of the shin, and we can see that in the third image, the bottom left one. As the heel comes off, we can see now the stretch of the back of the legs, the Achilles, the gastroc soleus, to give us a stretch reflex from there. And we see that elastic loading, and of course extension of the support leg, as we see in the fourth image there. So the swing-in segments, we've got the free leg coming through that full motion, loaded from the penultimate. So again, the speed of that free leg will be the stretch reflex of that free leg will help the speed through. And again, the speed of that is determined by the displacement of that penultimate step. And of course, the arms, we want to see them again in sync and in coordination with the legs, that powerful alternating drive, and then that block. That block is going to help lift the athlete to take off. And again, the path of the center of mass, again, as a result of that knee flexion, we are going to see a lowering and traveling into the board. But ultimately, we're going to see the rise of that hips passing as the hips pass over the board. Lots of stuff to go through there. We'll have a look at some videos shortly. Frank, any comments on that?
No, it's fine.
Cool. Okay. So in terms of the path of the center of mass, and for me, just illustrating that last point there at takeoff, we have we've got some kind of visual representations of this, again, pulled from 2017 World Championships. As you can see with Brittany Reese, at touchdown on the board, there's just after touchdown, there's a little bit of lowering. And I think referring back to the table was 1 centimetre. But we know that from Brittany's penultimate, she lowers excessively into the penultimate and starts to rise at takeoff. So that lowering is as a result of the little knee flexion that we see, and then we got the rise in the center of mass at toe off after the board. Where we compare that with Daria Klashina, we still see a shorter last stride coming in, but we see a greater degree of knee flexion. Well, we will shortly see a greater degree of knee flexion, and as a result, we see a greater lowering of the center of mass as she travels through the board. And again, there's another illustration there of Tiana there. So if we look at some of these figures on the table, the note at the bottom says a negative body inclination angle indicates that the center of mass is behind the foot of contact. So we can see that second column there, minus 39 degrees, minus 38, 35. All the center of mass is always behind that takeoff foot. A negative lead thigh angle means the thigh is below horizontal. And this is really interesting for me because we always we want to see that free leg and the thigh of that free leg drive through, and we want to block that to horizontal. But we can see here that none of the athletes are actually achieving that. They drive that knee just below horizontal. And then on the other one, we've got a negative angular velocity. So on the right table, we see the knee angle at touchdown. So we've got 156 degrees there of a knee angle from Brittany and 137 degrees there for the minimum knee angle. So the minimum knee angle or maximum knee flexion is 137, and that's the maximum knee flexion angle as the hips pass over the board. So if we look at Daria Klashina, 172 to 144. So again, we see that lowering, that contributing to the lowering of center of mass. And if we look at the men, we talk about Manyonga having 5 centimeters lowering, Lawson and Samai, very similar. Again, we talk about the same figures there, body angle and the thigh angle. Again, in the men, the thigh in terms of driving that through, none of them are really hitting that horizontal. I'm trying to look at, so we can see that there, reinforce the point.